people in the waiting room, and they just keep popping in. Look at all these. They're like kind of on Filipino time, but they're like 7:07 for them is like actually really early. I feel like if we start right now, they're gonna all right, well, 7:07. What do you think? Just go ahead. Joseph, can you I'm gonna go ahead and start. Joseph, can you just watch out for the waiting room?
Yep, got it.
All right, sweet. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Malaya Movement Baltimore's presentation on Filipino warrior culture. I have been looking forward to this webinar for a while now. Get ready to have some fun. We have a very special guest speaker tonight, and it is Joey Marana. Joey, hi.
Hello.
Hi. Joey is a teacher right here in Baltimore. Before we begin, though, I have an announcement to make. ABS-CBN, the Philippines' largest TV network, was ordered to shut down last night. And this is a huge disappointment and really an outrage that it actually happened. The Duterte government has also tried to shut down Rappler in the past, but were unsuccessful. And the reason that they go after these networks is because they're known for reporting news that criticizes the current administration, mostly the drug war. This is an outrage because, for one, ABS-CBN is the only accessible news channel in most rural parts of the Philippines. And secondly, to shut down an entire network just because you don't like them is a defining characteristic of a dictatorship. Renato Reyes tweeted this morning that the last time a major news network was shut down in the Philippines, it was during the era of Ferdinand Marcos. But I'm not actually sure that Duterte will formally declare a dictatorship. I said last year on my podcast that we're more likely headed towards an illiberal democracy, which actually works better in Duterte's favor. So please, if you are on social media, please keep tweeting hashtag no to ABS-CBN shutdown, because we need the international pressure. I saw that it was a trending topic for most of the world last night, and that's a good thing because we need to keep it in the public eye. So moving on, Filipino warrior culture. If you've been attending our webinars regularly and you came to our last presentation on Philippine pre-colonial history, this one fits very neatly between that one and our upcoming webinar this Friday, which is Philippines under Spanish colonial rule. Today, we're going to learn about how Filipino martial arts culture influenced resistance and revolution against our colonizers. And today's guest speaker is Guro Joey Marana.
Hi, Liza.
Joey is an instructor, or guro, for Kali in the Inosanto Kali lineage, with vast experience in sayoc and atienza Kali. He studied directly under Guro Dan Inosanto, who also studied with Bruce Lee, and both of them were under Ip Man himself. And of course, most importantly, Joey's my cousin. So I'll stop talking. I'll talk too much, like I'll get all excited, but I'm gonna hand it over to Joey at this point. But I will say that anyone who, like me, has ever been obsessed with the revolution and the part that revolutionary struggle has played into Filipino history, then you will really, really love this webinar. I watched John Wick 3 over the weekend, and I just wanted to see how much Filipino martial arts was used, and it's featured in every single fight scene. So Joey, I'm just going to pass it on to you now before I end up talking too much.
Sure. Thanks, Liza. And thank you, everyone at Malaya, for having me on for tonight. Just to kind of give you guys, just to kind of set the stage, this presentation is a little bit academic. There is some martial arts in it, and certainly I will be talking about martial arts. And at the my very last slide, I put together like a cool, fun little Filipino martial arts montage. Which has some, I just think, some cool things, stuff from Ahsoka Tano on the Clone Wars and some of the Marvel movies. But, you know, when Liza asked me if I would want to do something related to Filipino martial arts, I said absolutely, because Filipino martial arts, or more specifically, or more broadly, our Filipino warrior culture is inextricably tied with our identity as Filipinos. And so what's interesting is, you know, for full disclosure, I was not born in the Philippines. I actually do not speak any dialect fluently, and I was born here. But uh, through martial arts, I've learned so much about our culture and our identity. Um, I will probably say that I don't know, 98% of everything that I'm going to talk about tonight came from my teachers in martial arts. So Guro Dan Inosanto is my main teacher, but for many years, I was a direct student of Pamana Tuhon Chris Sayoc, Tuhon Carl Atienza, Guru Ramon Rubia, the Patalinghug family. And so I've had a lot of opportunities to have wonderful teachers, extremely skilled martial artists that talked to us about the history and the culture because it was so intertwined. So there's three things that I'll talk about this, and then I'll start going through the slides. So there's three main things I want everyone to keep in mind for tonight. This has to do with Filipino martial culture, but also with our culture and identity as Filipinos. One is kapwa, so our community and our people. Above all else, this is a priority. This is our central concern. The second thing is, what I'm trying to do in this presentation is not teach you anything, but rather awaken a knowledge that's already inside of you. And the third thing is to help you understand, and in the tradition of my teachers, help communicate that whether it's Kali, whether it's Kapwa, whether it's our culture, our identity as people, we are a history outside of time, a language outside of history, and a people that are outside of time and space. We certainly contain it, and we certainly occupy it, but we are so much more than a people that were given independence in this year, or are constrained by geopolitical boundaries that are established by this, you know, colonial power or whatever. So a lot of times when people talk about Filipino identity, the common discourse, even in the Philippines, has to do with like language, food, and dance. But for a lot of us, it's much more than that. You know, it can't be all than that. We have a deep history, a deep tradition. And in addition, especially everyone that's listening and watching today, we have a deep longing and deep hunger for ourselves and our culture and for connection. Strobel talked about how we are this language, and for lack of a better term, this language is a language outside of time. Her and both Dr. Wiley talked about how Filipino culture, especially Filipino martial arts, prioritizes what we call sacred time and space. Licauco writes about something called esoteric versus esoteric heritage and history and culture. So esoteric is the things that would be put on us by external forces, academics, historians, other countries, that said in 1899, this happened, in 1521, this happened. These are the people that migrated from these migration wave theories or land bridge theory or Austronesian, you know, sailors or whatever it is. So the esoteric heritage is something that Guro Inosanto has talked about for a long time. It was something that a lot of his students have accumulated over these years, but it's something as deep as we've all learned probably at some point that the 8 rays of the sun on the Filipino flag have to do with the 8 tribes or the 8 provinces that fought against the Spanish. But the esoteric history is that these were the people that were dispersed out of the lost continent, that were dispersed across the Pacific. And so that blends in a little bit too. So there's something that was a good quote. I was going to get to it later, but Strobel writes about how in our Western society, with our books and literature and research and science, she had to learn how to wean herself off of being addicted to cognitive certainty. So there are things that we can know that are deep in our hearts and in our souls, that with tons of things, not just our identity or culture or Filipino martial arts, we can know these things to be true and not have a quantifiable way to talk about it or to express it or to explain it. It doesn't make it any less true. There are certain truths that are just beyond the language that we've been given. So a lot of our culture and history is influenced by these belief systems, these behaviors. It filters the way that we perceive things. It integrates the way that we are with our world. And I'll get to this later, but through this culture and through our own internal mind's eye and through our third eye, we can access this dance that I'm going to be talking about. I will refer to it as Kali, but Filipino martial arts are commonly referred to as Kali, Eskrima, or Arnis. I'll talk about some of that a little bit, but Kali is a word that comes from the Visayan words kamut, meaning hand, and lihok, which is motion. And so we are an art of motion and an art of movement, and we can access this in many ways. So this is a term that Floro Villabril told Guro Inosanto to use because it was the name before the Spaniards came. And it's the name that I still use, although I asked Guru specifically, can I call it Kali? Do you want me to call it Kali? And for when I was naming my group, and he was like, no, just call it Filipino martial arts. He really hesitated for a long time, which is kind of a funny story, but he really just wanted me to call it Filipino martial arts. So I'm going to share my screen. This is the first time I'm using Zoom in this kind of way, so I hope it works. Okay, so Filipino warrior culture. So this is me. I put all my credentials, and the reason I put these credentials here is really to show you and explain to you that in the scheme of what I'm talking about, this means nothing. So any kind of academic achievement, you know, my certifications, I have subspecialty, I'm a subspecialty nurse in neonatal intensive care and public health nurse. But in what we're talking about, especially in Filipino martial arts, we would say in the Filipino martial arts that my skill is my rank. So my knowledge of my mind's eye, my knowledge of my soul and my heart, that is what is going to drive what I'm going to be talking about for tonight. So, hold on. So as I said before, I'm trying to awaken something and not teach you things, because deep inside you, there's something that you already know. Jose Rizal wrote to awaken your consciousness of our past, already effaced from our memory, and rectify what has been falsified and slandered. So obviously Jose Rizal lived much later than the pre-colonial times, but there's a stream and a thread that ties us all and runs through everything. And so this is what I'm going to be trying to do. It was never gone. A big, you know, Liza mentioned Bruce Lee, and Bruce Lee was heavily influenced by an Indian philosopher named Krishnamurti. And he talked about how everything in the world is contained inside of you, and everything inside of you is contained inside the world. So this is something, this is a knowledge that is never gone. If anything, maybe just asleep. We are beyond time and space. It is inside you, and the knowledge to this, the access to this information is your birthright. So this is not a primitive knowledge. It's just a different, if anything, I would consider deeper kind of knowing. So who am I and what is Kali? So as I said before, I've been trained by the Patalinghog family, Pamana Tohon, Chris Sayoc, Ton Carl, Guro Dan Inosanto, and many, many others. Kali is an art of movement, right? So we're not just looking, it's not a collection of techniques. It's not a method of combat, although it's all those things too. It is the use of motion to propel ourselves and express ourselves in our physical world. So we can talk about Kali sometimes in terms of ancient, classical, and modern, with ancient being pre-colonial. Classical is usually considered around our colonial times, and we've had multiple occupiers, and then there's modern versions. I'm not going to get too much into that, but we can talk about those different kinds of ways. The thing is, all of these have a common spirit and a common energy. One of the most powerful quotes that Pamana Tuhon Chris Sayoc told us was that every time you draw your blade, 10,000 hands draw their blade with you, which just means that we are tied in a lineage, a literal lineage and an energy lineage of people that continue to teach us, to continue to inform us and have given us the gifts that we have, the Kali that we have today. So what's interesting is Professor Guy Chase, who is a student of Ben Largusa in the Villarreal-Largusa system, talked about how before they begin their training, as they step into the training arena, what some people would call sacred time and space, or what Pamanatuan might call the Botawan, they would ask the spirits for their blessing. So all of the souls and the ancestors that came before, they asked their blessing to bless that training. And during the training, they're guided and they're accompanied by those spirits. And as they leave, those spirits give them the blessing for them to go on into their lives outside of that sacred time and space training ground. So I always found that to be kind of a beautiful image. So Guro Inosanto has always talked about how he does this with his Kali people, and he does this with his JKD, does this with everyone, that to better understand the martial art, you must understand the history. To understand the history, you must understand the culture. To understand the culture, you must understand the philosophy and what they were trying to express to the people of that time and period. So everything is rooted in a context, but the context doesn't necessarily, we talk about history and culture here, as I said before, we're not necessarily anchored in a certain time and space. If you look on the right, this is Guru's Kali logo, which has been in existence since the 70s. And you'll actually see a lot of symbolism here. There is a sacred geometry that, combat geometry that exists in Filipino martial arts. There's a Filipino numerology and ancient numerology, ancient systems of belief and science. And he also has these Babayan characters. And so it's been around for a long time. Actually, I told Christian I was going to reference this. When I finally met Christian Kabuay last year, he told me that when he met Guro Dan, Guro was he was probably like the only person above 50 that he had met that knew the Babayan characters and the existence of those ancient scripts, which there's many. There's not just Babayan, there's many. But we typically understand this as like a very ancient way of writing, an ancient, super ancient script, or we tend to see of it as a more modern resurgence. I attributed it almost single-handedly to Christian Kabuay, but this has been preserved and protected through our martial culture as well. So let's see, where am I? So our martial arts are inextricably woven in with history, culture, philosophy. Is super important in our understanding and appreciation of our culture. It's inseparable from it. So in the US, in American culture, we have a lot of things that are sort of modular, right? We have our main life, whatever we think that is, and then we have everything that we add on to it. So the things that are activities, basically, the things that we do for fun. So I like to go and practice martial arts, or I go and, go to my church on Sundays, and I go to yoga on Tuesday and Thursday nights, or whatever it is. But in many cultures, this is something that's a seamless existence. When we talk about the philosophy, Grand Tuan Leo Gahe, I like the way that he phrases it, although he can be somewhat polarizing and a lot of people dislike him. But he talks about how Kali philosophy, way of looking at life, is a belief in life and not death, a belief in success and not failure, and a belief in good health and not sickness. And those are the driving principles. You'll notice too, a lot of the things I talk about are in threes. There's a lot of Filipino numerology that has to do with threes, and geometry that has to do with triangles and circles and things like that. So we talk about the Philippines as one country and one nation, and this is just one example, but there's many, many tribes of the ancient Philippines. In fact, a lot of the current literature will talk about how there's upwards of 200, possibly more distinct, very distinct ethno-linguistic nations. So we all know this. When we speak different dialects, they're completely different from each other. It's not like a United States Northeast dialect and a Midwest dialect. These are completely different languages with different people. So we were put together as a country with a political grouping that these tribes really had no say in. And that's why probably even now, so many people identify ethnically with their province, sometimes much more with their nationality. So people will identify as Kapampangan and not necessarily Filipino, although they do that now too. So these were also broken up not just in tribes, but in kingdoms. You know, you had the Kingdom of Maynila, Kingdom of Tondo, Kingdom of Cebu, and some of these other places. Even when the Americans came, the Mindanao was still called Moro Province. So it's this amalgamation of many different cultures, many different peoples and scripts. And that to me is a true example of how diversity in its truest sense can really add to the vast multiculturalism and fabric and things to add as far as our nation. There's some writers that talk about like mega powers through the world, and what made them mega powers is their ability to incorporate and share so much of their rich diversity and history. So I love this quote. This comes from Vic Hurley. No one can say where the strange, unwritten history of the Philippines began. They wrote their records in red with bolo blades and wavy edge krisses on the shining white beach. But the tides came and the tropic rains and washed the records away. And really what this is like Filipinos even till now are not always that interested in archiving and preserving, not in the same way that our European and East Asian counterparts. And part of it is because we are, as a people, we do exist outside of a time and space. We still feel connected to our ancestors and our parents and our grandparents and our, our relatives that passed away many years ago. And we still look longingly towards a future where we're back together. And people talk about going back home in kind of a fond way. So our perception and utilization and mastery of time is a little bit different. Ton Leo Gahe, I got the chance to interview him, and he said something that I really liked. He said, I'll fight you in January and kill you in December. And he talked about that mastery of time. So he could mean that he has such mastery of time, he'll take his time, he'll fight you in January and take all the way until December to kill you. Or it could also mean, I fight you in January, but I've already killed you in December. So there's a liberal use, mastery, of vacillation of time. We talk in the sayoc system about future self, and how we can echo into the future, listen to the voices from the past. Even the earlier records of Babayan, were a lot of them were done on pieces of bamboo that were just stuck in the ground or hung from trees. It was never intended, not like the Laguna copper plate or some of these other things that were, in something very permanent. They were just written just for the time because it didn't really matter. Guru Ramon Robia told me that he went to visit this old master in Cebu, one of the first students of Doce Pares, which was established in 1932. And he was like, oh, do you have like the t-shirt? And this guy was like, yeah, I have it. I have it somewhere. It's in my garage. And they went to look for it, and he had been using it as like a rag to clean his car all these years. And Guru Ramon was like, I can't believe you've just been using this like precious artifact of our Doce Pares Club. But to that guy, I mean, it was just a shirt. That's just what he was using at the time. So when we talk about where we come from, there is the esoteric and esoteric history. So I'm not going to go into this too much, but I am happy to talk with anyone offline or go into this more. There is a lot of, the esoteric history believes that we are a people, one of the lost tribes that came from the motherland or motherhood continent of Mu, sometimes called Lemuria. I don't really like to call it Lemuria because that was like a Western terminology. But Lemuria was a lost continent that sank in the Pacific, and the descendants of those people and the subcontinents of those people, which had 7 mountains, 7 tribes, were dispersed throughout the Pacific and became the peoples of Samoa, of Hawaii, of the Pacific Rim, and all of our Southeast Asian neighbors as well. Guro Inosanto has been talking about that for a long time. There is some literature on it, but he'll say that even the directions of the flag through the esoteric culture bearers, that's what they believe that comes from. Obviously, there's all the different migration theories. I'm not going to get too much into that. The other thing that a lot of people growing up here in the U.S. don't know is we are part of a legacy and history and lineage of the Srivijayan Empire, which was a vast trading empire, and then the Majapahit Empire, which is the largest seafaring trading empire in the history of the world, greater than the boundaries of Rome at its peak. And so people will talk about, oh, the Philippines, it has like a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Guro Inosanto has talked about how we have 9 major influences in the Philippines. Now, this is up to modern day, but we have the Northern European culture really through us in the United States, Southern European culture through Spain, Northern Asian culture through Chinese Christians that were expelled from China. This is way back in the day. A Southern Asian culture through India, and he lists out the Indo-Aryan, Dravidian, Tamils, and Mongols. And then there's a Middle Eastern culture through Persia. And so you can see this in the food. He will always say that you can tell a lot by the culture based on the martial arts and the food. And so we all know about lumpia and pancit and things like that. But in the Southern Philippines, there's a whole different taste palette and set of different foods that have a lot more coconut and curry. There's black rice. There's all kinds of things that's super, super different than what we know of. It's just like how we have the rondalia music, the music of tinikling, but the kulintang music is very, very different. It feels very different, but no less Filipino. I would possibly argue even more Filipino just because it's a little bit deeper, because it comes from a place that has never been conquered. You know, the Philippines, especially the Southern Philippines, Moro Province or Mindanao, has never been conquered by anybody. It's never, well, probably by the Muslims way back in the day, but it was never conquered by Spain, never conquered by the US, never conquered by Japan, and they're fiercely proud of it. There's a dancer, and I really like this quote that she wrote, because she said, even though we are displaced by land, our consciousness is still home. So we have this connection through time and space that we are still of the people. You know, when I got to interview Master Virgil Apostle, who's a Manghilot in California, and I was asking him how these Manghilots, Albularias, you know, all these people with gifts and powers, how they got their powers, and if it came from the land. And really what I was trying to ask him is I was trying to see if he thought the remnants of Mu or Lemuria with these energized sort of like energetic boulders and rocks had fueled some of the people. And he said, no, it doesn't come from the land, it comes from the people. So the powers come from the people. And I found that to be a very fascinating thing. So again, we're not contained to time and place. The Dreamweavers talk about accessing a collective consciousness that's beyond themselves through their dreams, and that's what comes through in their in the fabric that they weave. That, you know, our Filipino identity again is indistinguishable from warrior culture because of all these things. So it's woven through all the way through. The other thing is, let me see. So our identity is really rooted again in this universal theme of kapwa. And there's all these things about Filipino identity right now in the common literature, and I will just be super honest. I reject a lot of that. Not all of it. I just feel like it's a small sliver of what our vast experience and identity is. And so the things in like Filipino psychology or Filipino psikolohiya have to do with like being shy, hiya, or having like a moral debt, utang na loob. But there's so much more than that. So in the last lecture, one of the presenters had talked about like the Maharlika warrior class. But really the tribal structure of the ancient Philippines had to do with 4 main identities in the tribe. And it was the Datu or Raja or chief, whatever it was, the Ton or whatever. Then you had the Bagani or Bayani or Mandarigma, which is a warrior. You had the Panday or the craftsman. So traditionally the Panday is like a blacksmith, the person that would make the weaponry. So Panday Pira, the one that made like the first one that made like, or became famous for the latankas, those old cannons. It's interesting because even today in Filipino martial arts, and even in the Inosanto blend, there's techniques that if you had to fire a latanka because the blast was so powerful, that the technique to it is a backwards roll to incorporate the fact that the latanka on top of the karakoa would be so powerful that would knock you back. So you needed this backward roll to sort of accommodate that. So I find that amusing, but also ingenious because that incorporates the technology of the time. So you had the chief, the Datu, you had the warrior, the bagani or the mandarigma. You had the craftsman, the blacksmith, the panday. But you also had the babaylan. So you had the babaylan or the manghilot or the arbolaria. So this is the whole healing side of things. When people talk about the esoteric culture of the Philippines, they talk about how the people that came from Mu were masters of combat, but predisposed to enlightened learning. So they would argue that that's why Filipinos are not just good in martial arts and good with warrior culture, but also have propensity towards enlightenment, towards faith, towards things like that. So I'm going on too many tangents. I'll try to keep it a little bit closer. The other thing is we're different than what a lot of people know of today. The Philippine ancient culture is highly, highly matriarchal. So in the olden days, the men would walk behind the women. In the history of the Philippines, there's 7 distinct from the provinces, 7 distinct Joan of Arcs. There's Princess Urduja, Princess Josephine, the blind princess that taught the most famous escrimador in our lineage, which was Flor Villabrail. So we have these strong women. Even today in our cultures, many women of the household are the ones that are in charge of the money. And men will still do the work. They'll still be the warriors. They'll still do other things. But the women are the healers. They're the ones that will explore. They're the ones that have the spiritual connection. But this warrior spirit is, I love it. I will just tell you, I just love it. So this was something from the Philippine Commission where I think his name is so great, the Lion of God. He said, "Do not come in the night, pigs. If you do, I will crush you. In the daytime, so that the Moros can see the dead Americans. Ashamed be God, all of you that come. I will give a sanggud or marriage portion to the virgin. Dorambako, the Chris that cuts fast is ready." So the southern Philippines was really like a source of, they were able to hold out for a long, long time. And that mentality is a mix of the Buddhists that came super early on, the Muslims that came, the Dutch, the Portuguese, the Spanish. The Portuguese came here before the Spanish, and the Dutch were here before the Portuguese. So we are a people that have never been conquered in our entirety, and especially in the southern province. So the warrior culture qualities, this is actually where it starts to blend into some other like more East Asian qualities. But again, my Tagalog isn't so good, so I'll probably butcher these, but matapang, courageous; malakas, strong; marangal, honorable; magalang, respectful; mapagkumbaba, humble; makabayan, love of people; magpalingkod, helpful; and makapag-ananam palataya, faith-filled. So that's the last time I will ever say those words because they don't roll off the tongue so easily for me. But, you know, these are the qualities that I think in my mind, and I would argue that in many other Kalistas or Escrimadors or Arnistadors' minds, signify and characterize Filipino identity and culture much more than the lumpia and the tinikling and the Tagalog, as important as that is. There was a manong that once said, no one would tell me who said it, but he said, you know, he was watching this cultural presentation, all these people doing tinikling, and he was saying to them, "You're doing the dance they did to make their capturer happy instead of training in what they used to defeat their invader." And all the martial artists got a good laugh about that. It is important, and I'll talk about that too. It's encoded, but we tend to think of Filipinos as these kind of emotional, karaoke singing, you know, like hiya or like overly happy and singing all the time. There's that side, but there is a stoic side too. We have the happy rondalia, but there is the deeper, more serious kulintang sound of it also. So when we talk about kapwa, for the people, again, for the people, we talk about pakikisama, which is the harmony, pakikitungo, respect, and pakikiramay, which is coming together. There's this, I don't know if it is, I very much rejected this living the life of the small, this kind of humble, hiya, overly docile aspect of Filipino culture. And that is just, I think, strongly a remnant of our colonial periods. We are descendants of kings and of queens, of princesses, rajas, and datus, and warriors. We are not captive chattel that are defined by the corned beef and and the see-through barong Tagalogs, as much as I like those things too. Early writers, when they would come to the Philippines, would talk about how every adult male past the age of childhood wore a blade. To appear unarmed in public was a sign of disgrace or indicated that one was a slave. You know, Guru Victor, a good friend of mine who passed away 3 years ago, when he was in the Philippines, they were doing a joint, they wanted to do like a BJJ and Kali seminar. So BJJ kind of representing the MMA of today and, you know, like whatever, wearing their Japanese gis and stuff. And they had this Kali guy, like deep Kali guy that was like from the province. That always, he had like a blade and a pistol on him all the time. In fact, he fell asleep before the seminar in the car, and he was sleeping, and his seat was reclined, and he had the pistol on his chest, and everyone was afraid to wake him up because they thought he was going to shoot them. But in the seminar, at one point, the BJJ guy said to this guy, okay, so let's pretend you're in this position, and how would you get out of it? So the Kali guy was like, well, I would just take my blade, I'd thrust it into your eye. And the BJJ guy was like, well, no, okay. And everyone had a good laugh. And he was like, let's just pretend you don't have your blade. And Guru Victor said, this guy went off the handle and just was enraged and was like, what do you mean? Why would I not have my blade? Why would I not have my knife? And he took out like a training blade and he was thrusting into this guy's like face in his eye. He's like, why would I not have this? You know, in Silat, Guru had told us that there is no Silat without the blade, and there's no blade without Silat, and it's the same with Kali. In fact, Guro Inosanto says that Kali is Silat, which is combat judo, which is all these other things too, and I believe that too. So the blade part of our culture is indispensable. You may, if you saw me before I started these slides, I have some blades behind me, and that is a big part of our martial culture. So in the martial culture, where am I? I'm like, I do have notes, but so the teacher's a guide and a support. So my job as a guru is to be a vehicle for discovery. I'm not a dictator. It's not like this kind of pyramid scheme shape of a model where everyone under me looks like me and they have to do everything exactly like I do. In Kali, we are reversed. So I hold and I support above me all of my students. And when I become an instructor, it is my burden. All of their successes and failures, actually all of their failures are on me, all their successes are on them. So Guru Mike Panna talked about how when you train in Kali, my goal is not to make you look like me. My goal is to make you look like you. It's just however it's expressed. So, you know, we have all these different, however it's expressed, whether in the barangay, whether you're the datu, whether you're in the Botoan. The Botoan was like a sacred space, this kind of very difficult to find any documentation of it, but a space where people will learn Kali, but also learn about the other values. They learn the writing, they learn the pandai, they learn tons of things. And in the families, in the ancient culture, the families train together. So part of why we have so many forms of Filipino martial arts weapons is that, you know, I may be in front, if I'm the most fierce, most able-bodied fighter, I may have my sword and or my two swords or whatever, and my strongest daughters or sons next to me, they might have a sword and shield, and the children would be firing arrows from bows, and the elderly may have spears so they can all attack from the sides, and we can all fight together as a family because that's how we would have to survive. So that's uniquely different than other martial arts, which you're training, you know, with bare feet, you know, in some other place. In our Filipino martial arts, everything was always done against multiple people, by multiple people. So we talk about multiple opponents being multiple people that we might have to deal with. But we talk about mass attack, like I'm fighting with my barkada, I'm fighting with my tribe, I'm fighting with my family. There's stories of these Spanish conquistadors that would have these ornately designed breastplates, like brass breastplates or something. And it incensed these Filipinos so much that they would attack these guys. This we talk about it, dumog, this kind of grappling, but dumog comes from like dudumog, like you're gonna mob someone. These people, instead of whatever, Ronda Rousey doing a supine armbar, imagine 4 Filipinos doing arm bars and knee bars and leg bars, each holding down a limb, someone controlling the head and cutting off all the limbs in the head, leaving the breastplate shining in the sun, and leaving off with everything, you know, with that tribe. So the tribe would fight together, and they would come together whenever they had to. That spirit, that warrior martial art, is also what gave rise initially to some of the colors of red being used as a symbol of blood and bravery, but also of achievement. And same with the batak, or batok, the tattoos that would come and later signify the pintados, as they would soon be called. So we talk about sometimes Filipinos having hot blood, and some people misattribute this just to Spanish, but it is the blood that runs through all of our people, through all of our experiences and people. They had written once that every adult, the blood runs too hotly in their veins, and they carry too many weapons for that. People will talk about Filipinos as bristling with blades or bristling with daggers. Like the bodyguard of Solomon, they all handle the sword and are expert in war. Every man hath his sword upon his thigh because of fear in the night. So there was one time when Nikki gave a presentation, she talked about how Philippines were dripping with gold, but not only dripping with gold, but bristling with daggers. So again, we were warriors, we were heroes, we were leaders, whether it's Lapu-Lapu, the Dato of Mactan, Raja Sulaiman, the last king of Manila, Bonifacio, Aguinaldo. There's all stories of, even in the Katipunan, they talked about in the initiation, there'd be like a bolo on the table when people would have to, you know, answer their questions. The Katipunan was founded on a belief and a philosophy of struggle through armed conflict, or achievement, or freedom, or independence through armed conflict, specifically through that. So we have this history of Teresa Magbanua, Gabriela Silang, all these very fierce women warriors in our history and our culture. We were also talking about how we would always protect the culture. On the right, you see this is a picture of a tattoo. Is this a tattoo? I believe this is a tattoo on Tatang Illustrisimo's chest. So the belief and protection of the tattoos, the Babayan, the script. I filmed something of me doing the Babayan script in the air as Amara, or patterns in the air, because Guru would talk about it and we'd have to do it sometimes. But I couldn't, it was weird. I couldn't get it to like format properly for this presentation. But anting, some of these things that you cannot find in the academic literature, unless it's talking about like kind of folk practices or something, are always protected by the culture. The Maragtas code, the code of Kalantiao, all of these things were always passed on in our oral history and oral tradition. They exist still in the anito, the spirits, the anting, the oraciones, the prayers, the encantos, the sacred time and space, the singkil and lanka, the dances that contain our motion and our language, the festivals that still commemorate it, the writing, whether it's Babayan or many of the other scripts, whether it's the tradition of pintados, tatak or batak. All of that is always protected through the culture. Guro Inosanto said that a culture cannot survive unless it has some way to defend itself and preserve itself. And so this is encoded in the martial arts. In our footwork, we have our triangle footwork. This is a picture of Pamanaton, Chris Sayoc, and his children. So we would always train with families invited. And in the system, when we would have our sama-samas and get together, Pamanaton would always have his kids around, because it was important for them to see that this is what the family did. This is what the culture did. And it was important to see that students, Filipino or not, would recognize this is one of the things that sets our art apart from others, right? This isn't an activity that daddy's going to go to on the weekend. This is something that was a whole part of the family. Those girls there, they made the whips that I use. They would make the trapos, the, you know, like all the things that we would use even till now. And so it was always a big family motion, a big family endeavor. The martial arts, it's encoded in the motion. If you take any of that, let's say Babayan, because that's the one that's most familiar to me. If I take a knife in my hand and go through the motions of all the syllables, all the characters, it flows. It doesn't look like the alpha numeric, you know, Roman-based angular characters. My hand motion, my movement. We talk about arnis being an extrapolation of armas, but it's much more than that. Arnis being like the harness and the armor, but now it's my motion that's the armor, not my physical armor that I'm wearing. It's in a word tradition. It's in our birthright. You know, there's a great story that Tuan Pat Consing told me that when he wanted to start teaching martial arts, he wanted to go and get these certifications and train in Muay Thai and do these other things. And Manatuan told him, and also later told me, you do not need anyone's permission to train and to teach our culture and our Filipino martial arts. It is your birthright to practice it and to teach it. You do not need anyone's permission to do that. And same with all of our sacred knowledge, any of the things that come through our culture. So related to that, this was much having to do with ethnochoreology, but I love it because the phrase perfectly encapsulates the dance of Kali, the dance of our culture, the dance of our ancestors. That dance is not just a static representation of history, not just a repository of meaning, but a producer of meaning each time it's produced, not just a living mirror of a culture, but a sharpening, I think I meant to write, a shaping part of culture, a power within the culture. And so this is proliferated through so many things. A lot of people don't know, if you look at that picture on the left, the flag of the Majapahit Empire is that red and white striped flag. Well, when traders came, the East India British Trading Company, they took that flag and put the Great Britain flag on it. And then that eventually got transposed. And that's what we have is our present day United States flag. Most people have no idea that that happens. You know, there's a picture of LL Cool J with Tone Bryan and Tone Raff. You know, our Filipino martial arts still proliferate through all things. There's a picture of the director of John Wick. Shoot, I can't remember his name. I'm glad he's not on this webinar right now. But those guys, you know, most of 8711, which is the big action design choreography company in Hollywood, they do things. These warriors from Black Panther, designed by Filipinos, patterned after Filipino warriors. There's a phrase that we use in the Inosanto system that was taught to Guru, and Guru still sometimes says to us, but ano ang Kali? Ako ang Kali. Ikaw ang Kali. Ito ang Git Kali. So what is Kali? What is this? I am Kali. You are Kali. Between us here, between our people, our Kapwa, this is true Kali. The old geometry is super important, and this is how, I mean, this is in like Guro Inosanto's instructor manuals that was passed out in the 70s to like any JKD person, but this is like extreme, this is like super deep, super powerful, but these are your internal triangles, my rhythm triangles, like my mind and my body, my motion, my spirit, my individual, my tribe. And so it's still encoded in different kinds of ways. And the last thing I will just finish, this is our salutation, because I think it perfectly encapsulates the Inosanto Kali energy, but also our warrior spirit and culture, and in very much our own Filipino identity. With heaven and earth as my witness, I stand before the Creator and mankind. I strive for knowledge of the five senses and beyond the five senses. I strive for the love of mankind, that there be no needless shedding of blood. I bow not in submission, but in respect. I extend the hand of friendship over the hand of war and look to the Creator for divine guidance. If my friendship is rejected, I am trained to be a warrior. I stand in symbolism, for I serve only the Creator, my family, and my people. For with my heart and my mind, I cherish the knowledge my instructors have given me, for it is my life in combat. I am prepared to go against you, even if your skill is superior to mine. And if my body falls to you in combat, you have only defeated my physical body. For my fighting spirit will arise to the heavens, for it is unconquerable. And with that, Liza, what do you think? I put together this like martial arts montage, but if any, I can also open up for questions if anyone has any questions. So what do you guys think? I'm happy to do either one.
Yeah, why don't you play the video, and if people have questions, put them in the chat, and then we'll get, you know,
okay,
we'll
I'll play
collect
the
all the
video,
questions. We'll
and
come
then
back to it after the video.
it's like 10 minutes, so I think it's pretty good. I made it myself. The composition is mine.
All right, awesome.
Oops, sorry. No. Does this work? Oh, I was trying to close a window. Oh my goodness.
We've got a bunch of questions already in the chat. if you want to go ahead and answer them now while the
Sure.
video is playing.
Actually, why don't I stop this for now?
Okay.
A cool hand lock.
Can you see the questions, or do you
Oh
want me to
yeah.
read out to
Let
you?
me see.
I think that the first one is from Ryan Tinloy. Do you see that one?
Hang on, just hold on. Can you read it to me for now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Joey, what's your thoughts about blending different styles with Filipino martial arts? I study Wing Chun, Kung Fu, and Kali, and other styles complement it really well.
So, you know, it's always in our whole history, either as a people or in Filipino martials, to blend things together. So I think it's a very good thing. It's a very Filipino thing to do that. And you can look at that in any of the iconic things that are Filipino, right? So whether it's a jeepney that had blended things old and new, whether it's in Filipino fashion, yeah, whether it's with Filipino DJs in the Bay Area, or whether it's in Filipino martial arts that exists. There are some people that will say that you don't want to dilute Filipino martial arts with sort of inferior systems. And I go back and forth. I can appreciate that and understand it. Uh, I think if anything, what can drive you in blending things has to do much more with what it is that you're trying to do. So if I'm trying to protect my family, that's going to dictate one kind of thing. If I'm trying to get in shape, that's another. If I'm trying to compete, that's another kind of thing. So in general, I think it's very good.
Okay. The next one is, what do you think? It's from Maria Dizon. I love your presentation. What do you think are some distinguishing factors that set Filipino martial arts apart from others?
Uh, so one is a priority on movement and motion. So we talk about how we want to develop motion habits and the utilization of flow, as well as play and creativity. And that is very different than other things. So let's say in a karate system, you want to have this amount of weight on one leg, your hand at this angle, whatever it is. And Filipino martial arts is not that at all. You should look like you. You should absolutely not look like me unless you are my twin and you have my exact same experience. And so there's things that make us unique. What makes us unique is Filipino martial arts can incorporate other things, and other things really can't incorporate other martial arts.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is anything on my body can be used as a weapon against anything on your body. So if I am target shooting, for instance, I'm only shooting towards the midsection of the body or the head. And so if I translate that to like, let's say Taekwondo sparring, I'm looking to kick the body and maybe kick the head with my feet or with my hands. In Filipino martial arts, I'll use anything from my finger to pinch, to my neck, to my jaws to bite, to my toe to grab, to everything, to my fist against anything. So I'll punch you in the toe and I'll kick you in the head. I'll slice your eye with a blade. I'll use a baseball bat or a pipe. I'll use anything and everything. I'll use a yo-yo. I'll use whatever I want. So it's very flexible in those ways because it's incorporating and really reflecting that side of our culture.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought something was really interesting about your lecture was how you mentioned earlier that it was very family focused, like everybody fights together, even the kids.
Yes.
And like the lolos and the lolas.
And it doesn't mean that everyone is going to fight the same, right? So it doesn't mean that we're all fist fighting. It just means that everyone has their job and everyone has the role that they play. But it just means that the family has to train together. That's not going to come, it is inside of you, but it's not going to come out necessarily right away, right when you need it.
Yeah. We have another question, and this one is from Justin Kowalski, who's my husband. Thank you for the awesome presentation, Guro Joey. Can you talk a little bit how martial culture was preserved and shared in the post-colonial environment?
So there is a big strain, or train rather, of existence in Filipino culture that was always underground. So whether it's the Katipunan, whether it's the Hukbalahap, there is a big component of our culture and people that was always secret and hidden. That exists even in martial arts today. And so the guardians of those people, of those sects, whether it's the New People's Army that was hiding out in the mountains and guarded by, uh, resistance fighters with Armalites. There was always a component of that. The Philippines, the geography itself lends so easily for people to run and hide in the jungle or in the mountains. And so a lot of that was preserved in those ways. And a lot of it was the oral tradition. If you ever look at Guro Inosanto's logo, there's a crescent moon at the top, and that to symbolize that this was taught on plantations, on sugarcane plantations, in asparagus fields at nighttime under the light of the moon, because it was only taught on a need-to-know basis, fathers to sons, or friends to each other, brothers to each other, because it was never intended really to be largely commercial and mass-produced. It was meant that, hey, we hear that this thing is coming and we need to get ready, so let's use whatever we use, chako or whatever. So a lot of people don't know that when Bruce Lee uses nunchucks, that's not a Chinese weapon. That is chako, or tabak tayok,
Wow.
from Filipino martial arts that Guro Dan taught him. So even if you look at the Okinawan nunchaku, it doesn't look like that. The flow of it is from Kali. In fact, Bruce Lee told Guru that he thought it was a piece of junk. And then when Guru came back the next morning, he's like, actually, look at this. I think it's pretty cool. I'm going to use it in the movies. So that's kind of an interesting part of history.
Yeah, one of Bruce Lee's most famous movie posters is the nunchuck one.
Yeah, yeah.
You mentioned before that a lot of the moves were hidden in the dances.
Yes. So Guro Inosanto, when he was younger, his main teacher was this guy, Master Juanito, or Master Juan Lacosta. And he would make him learn all the dances because the movement, like capoeira, similar to capoeira, was hidden in a motion that still preserved it. Sometimes it's very literal. If you look at the Sinkil dance, like there's swords and they're doing footwork, and I mean, it's right there. But you can see it in the dance. I'm terrible about the remembering of the names, but the dances where they hit the coconuts on the body, the dances with the candles where they're turning their arms. It is hidden in the dances like that. It's also hidden in some ways. I referenced the babae, and it reminded me, in the 80s in graffiti culture in New York, they talked about good graffiti should look like the letter form and letter shape, look like the letters should be dancing. And if you look at babae, and that's what it looks like too, especially if you look at the la, or the ka, or the ta, some of those characters, or sa especially, or ga or nya, you'll see a lot of that where it's very motion. It's influenced by motion. It's not separate from that.
Okay. There's another question here from Melissa Feliciano. Is there a link to the montage that you showed us?
I will put it up, but I didn't want to put it up too early because I'm almost positive it will be flagged for copyright because I just took the songs. Yeah. The footage itself as well as the music, because I muted out all the action sounds. So I'll put it up. I just don't know how long it's going to stay there. And then I'll send it to
what we can do is if you put it in one of those like private links so that only people with the link can view it,
yeah,
we can send it out in the follow-up email.
Okay, yeah, I'll do that.
Okay. We have another question from Victor Reyes. Are there any texts you could recommend that focuses on Kali, Philippine history, and some of the core philosophies you reviewed today?
So I will send this out too. I did start on a list. So the philosophies are going to come in many different ways. I really like the other thing that I have like mixed feelings about is some of the earliest writings were done by like Westerners. So William Henry Scott wrote this sort of seminal book called Barangay, 16th Century Philippine Culture and Society. His parents were missionaries in the Philippines, but he grew up there and got a really close, in-depth view of the culture. That book is hard to find, and if you find it, it's pretty expensive. Um, and then there's some stuff by like Hocano, like F. Landa Hocano, who is like he wrote about a lot about the Philippine prehistory. Um, I would, I'll send this also. I'll send it to Liza. Maybe there's a way that you guys can share it that has some of the books. A lot of it's still contained. The Moros in the southern Philippines still retained a lot of the old history because they were able to protect it. That Lake Cebu in where's it? Lake Taboli, I think, in Mindanao. It was like impenetrable from the Spanish. They couldn't get in. The Japanese couldn't get in. The Americans eventually got in, but it took them like a very long time. But so they were able to preserve it for so long because they just were so good with their tactics. A lot of people think that the Filipino warriors in the past, whether it was Lapu-Lapu or the Moros, were just fierce warriors, which they were, but they were incredibly intelligent with their tactics. So people know that Magellan was defeated and killed by Lapu-Lapu and his men on the shores of Mactan. What they don't know is that Magellan had also sent troops via this path to invade Lapu-Lapu's village. And so Lapu-Lapu, with foresight and strategy, also sent men to intercept them. So the battle went on. It wasn't just in the Bay of Mactan. It happened a lot in other places too, but the Filipinos were ingenious with their warfare strategy and tactics.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The next one is from Taya. Thank you for this. Tons of great information. How are you continuing training during COVID?
You know what? There's a lot of good information it's just crazy on social media and on the internet. There's a lot of teachers that are putting stuff out. I guess everyone's just, as stir crazy as everyone else. So there's quite a bit of information. The other thing is in Filipino martial arts, we have something called carenza. Sometimes it's called free flow. Sometimes it's called amara. Sometimes it's called freestyle. It's not just a kind of free-flowing motion, but it's supposed to be intensely introspective with the use of imagery. If you ever research Olympic athletes, they use imagery quite a bit. And carenza or numerada or any of those methods is a way to solo train, like shadow boxing, like shadow blade or shadow fighting. But really using intensely your imagination and spirit to help guide that. So I've been doing that quite a bit, which I like a lot. And a lot of the things that always signified Kali in general was training outside. And now that the weather's getting a little bit nicer, it's been nice to do that too. So I finally figured out how to look at this group chat, Liza. So I'm looking at these.
Okay.
There's so many.
I think that there is just one more after the one we just did, and it's from Julie Sayo. Thank you, Guro Joey, for your presentation. What are your thoughts on different styles, family systems of Kali, and do you think that there will ever be one unified FMA?
I don't think so, and I think that's good. Because I think there's so much diversity in our people. We span so many tribes and cultures, the thousands of islands, the many continents, the lands that exist now and that have existed through time. And so I think it's very good that I love the fact that if you go to Filipino parties, pancit, it tastes different to every tita that makes it, and it's delicious every time.
Yeah.
I think that's awesome. I would not, it would be a loss, I think, if, let's say we went anywhere and it was just like McDonald's, so universally consistent. Part of the Filipino is the ingenuity, the creativity, the expression, the artistic manifestation. And I think that's a wonderful thing, that even when people do their dance, even when you can have 100 college dance troupes that do Tinikling, and it'll look different every time, and that's a wonderful thing.
Well, I think that that's the end. Andrew or Kat and Joseph, any closing before we say goodbye to everybody?
No, just thank you very much to Joseph.
Yeah, I was trying to unmute. It's nice having you all. It's really, good to see people embracing this and engaging, and looking forward to more in the future.
Thank you everyone for attending. Remember that on Friday, we are hosting, Malaya Movement Baltimore is hosting session 2 of our Philippine Society and Revolution crash course. And we'll be covering 1521 to the American regime. So pretty much just Spanish colonization. Don't forget also to follow us on social media. We are on Instagram as malaya.baltimore, and we're also on Facebook, Malaya Movement DMV Baltimore. So you'll all get a follow-up email with a lot of the links and a copy of the recording of this presentation. And thanks everyone. Have a good night.